The year is 1590. A ship approaches the shores of Roanoke Island off the coast of what we now call North Carolina. On board is John White, an artist, cartographer, and reluctant leader returning after a 3-year absence. As the shoreline comes into view, his heart races with anticipation. Somewhere on this island are 117 colonists, including his daughter Eleanor and granddaughter Virginia, the first English child born in the New World. But as White's landing party makes its way inland, an eerie silence greets them. The modest settlement, once alive with the sounds of construction, conversation, and community, stands completely abandoned. No bodies, no signs of violence, no indication of where everyone went. The only clue, the word Croatoan carved into a fence post, and the letters CRO etched into a nearby tree. America's first English colony had simply vanished. More than 4 centuries later, the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists remains one of history's most enduring mysteries. A cosmic convergence of unfortunate timing, environmental catastrophe, and cultural misunderstanding that continues to captivate our collective imagination to this day. To understand this mystery, we need to rewind to the geopolitical realities of the late 16th century. England and Spain were locked in a global power struggle, with Spain dominating the colonization of the Americas. Sir Walter Raleigh, ambitious explorer and favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, saw an opportunity to challenge Spanish dominance by establishing an English foothold in North America. This wasn't merely about planting a flag. The strategic objectives were clear: harass Spanish shipping, search for precious metals, find a passage to the Pacific, and convert indigenous peoples to Christianity. In 1584, Raleigh dispatched a reconnaissance mission led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow to explore the coastal areas of what they called Virginia, named to honor the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth. Their reports painted an almost Eden-like picture of the region: fertile lands, abundant wildlife, and seemingly friendly native populations. They returned to England with 2 Algonquian men, Manteo from the Croatoan tribe and Wanchese from the Secatan tribe. Queen Elizabeth was impressed enough to knight Raleigh and grant him governorship of Virginia. By 1585, Raleigh had organized the first colony on Roanoke Island. Led by Ralph Lane, this initial attempt consisted primarily of military men focused on exploration rather than sustainable settlement. Relations with the local Secatan tribe quickly deteriorated, culminating in the burning of a Secatan village over a missing silver cup. When Sir Francis Drake happened to visit in 1586, the colonists, struggling with dwindling supplies and increasingly hostile neighbors, abandoned the settlement and returned to England. Undeterred by this initial failure, Raleigh organized a second, more ambitious expedition in 1587. This time, he sought to establish a genuine community rather than a military outpost. John White, who had participated in the first expedition as an artist documenting the new territory, was appointed governor of the city of Raleigh. The 117th colonists of this second attempt included women and children, with families investing in the venture in exchange for land grants and a voice in governance. Among them were White's pregnant daughter Eleanor and her husband Ananias Dare. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor gave birth to Virginia Dare, becoming the first English child born in the Americas, a symbolic milestone in England's ambitions for the New World. But problems emerged almost immediately. The colonists had arrived too late in the growing season to establish sustainable crops. Their captain, Simon Fernandez, refused to take them to their intended destination in the Chesapeake Bay, insisting they settle at Roanoke despite the previous colony's failures there. And the settlers feared retribution from the Secatans, whose chief had been killed by the previous colonists. Just days after their arrival, tensions boiled over when a colonist was killed by natives while crabbing alone, prompting the English to attack a friendly village in misguided retaliation. The situation was becoming untenable, and the colonists convinced Governor White to return to England for supplies and reinforcements. White departed reluctantly, leaving behind his family and the entire colony with a plan to return within months. He could not possibly have known that it would be 3 long years before he would see Roanoke again, or that his return would mark the beginning of one of history's great mysteries. As White sailed for England in late August 1587, he could not have anticipated the catastrophic timing of his journey. Tensions between England and Spain had reached a breaking point, culminating in the launch of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Queen Elizabeth I ordered a general stay of shipping, preventing vessels from leaving English ports as the nation prepared for potential invasion. Despite Sir Walter Raleigh's attempts to organize a relief expedition, White was stranded in England while his colony, including his daughter and infant granddaughter, struggled to survive in a hostile environment. It wasn't until 1590, after Spain's defeat and England's subsequent naval campaign against Spanish territories, that White finally secured passage back to Roanoke on a privateering expedition. What White didn't know, what no European at the time could have known, was that his colonists had the profound misfortune of attempting to establish themselves during what tree ring data now reveals was the most severe 3-year drought in the region in 800 years. Between 1587 and 1589, precisely when the colonists were left to fend for themselves, the Outer Banks experienced catastrophic dry conditions that would have devastated both European crops and native food sources. When White finally returned to Roanoke on August 18, 1590, coincidentally, what would have been his granddaughter Virginia's 3rd birthday, the settlement was completely deserted. The houses had been dismantled, suggesting a planned rather than forced departure. White found no crosses, the agreed-upon distress signal, but instead discovered Croatoan carved on a palisade post and CRO on a nearby tree. To White, this seemed a clear indication. The colonists had relocated to Croatoan Island, now Hatteras Island, home of Chief Manteo's people, who had maintained friendly relations with the English. White attempted to sail to Croatoan, but a violent storm arose, damaging his ships and forcing his return to England without confirming the colonists' fate. He never returned to America, dying around 1593 in Ireland, still not knowing what had become of his family and the other settlers. For centuries, the fate of the lost colony remained purely speculative. But in recent decades, archaeological investigations have begun to illuminate possible answers. In 1998, a ring was discovered on Hatteras Island that appeared to be a signet ring bearing the heraldry of a Kendall family from the 16th century. Though initially celebrated as breakthrough evidence, subsequent analysis has been less conclusive. More compelling evidence emerged in 2012 when researchers examining John White's map of the region discovered hidden markings visible only when the map was viewed with a light table. Under a patch at the confluence of the Roanoke and Chowan rivers, approximately 50 miles inland from the original settlement, was a 4-pointed star symbol thought to represent a fort. The faint outline of a fort, drawn in invisible ink, was also found on the patch itself. This discovery prompted excavations in what is now Bertie County, North Carolina. In a site designated as Site X, archaeologists unearthed fragments of English pottery, a German jeton, a brass counter, and other 16th century European artifacts consistent with the period of the lost colony. Meanwhile, on Hatteras Island, formerly Croatoan, European artifacts dating to the late 16th century have been discovered, including a sword hilt, gun hardware, and slate writing tablet fragments at a Native American village site. These finds lend credence to the theory that at least some colonists integrated with the friendly Croatoan tribe. The most recent archaeological discoveries from 2020 have uncovered additional European artifacts at sites both 50 miles west and 50 miles south of Roanoke Island, suggesting that the colonists may have split into multiple groups rather than relocating as a single community. As archaeological evidence accumulates, several theories have emerged about the colonists' fate, each supported by different lines of evidence. The most straightforward explanation, and the one consistent with John White's interpretation of the Croatoan carving, is that the settlers relocated to Hatteras Island and integrated with the Croatoan tribe. Archaeological evidence of European artifacts on the island supports this theory, as does historical documentation from John Lawson, who, in 1701, encountered Hatteras natives with gray eyes who claimed white ancestors. Another theory, supported by the hidden fort symbol on White's map and archaeological findings at Site X, suggests that at least some colonists moved inland to the Chowan River area. This aligns with the colonists' original plan to settle 50 miles inland, as White later recalled. A third possibility is that the colony splintered into multiple groups, with some going to Croatoan Island while others moved inland. Recent archaeological evidence from multiple sites supports this theory, suggesting that different families may have sought refuge with different native communities. More ominous theories have suggested that the colonists were attacked by hostile natives or captured by Spanish forces seeking to eliminate English settlements. However, the lack of evidence of violence at the Roanoke site, the dismantled rather than destroyed structures, and the absence of the agreed-upon distress signal, a cross, argue against these scenarios. Perhaps the most compelling perspective comes from combining historical records with modern scientific data. Tree ring studies have revealed that the 1587 to 1589 period marked the worst drought in the region in 800 years. This environmental catastrophe would have created a desperate situation for both the colonists and native populations, potentially forcing the English settlers to disperse and seek assistance from any friendly tribes willing to take them in. The most comprehensive explanation, one that accounts for the archaeological evidence, historical documentation, and environmental data, suggests that the Roanoke colonists employed an adaptive survival strategy in response to catastrophic drought conditions. As food supplies dwindled in 1587 to 1588, the colonists likely recognized that their settlement was unsustainable. Rather than perishing together, they appear to have made a rational decision to dismantle their settlement, explaining the lack of abandoned structures, and split into smaller groups that could be more easily absorbed by different native communities. The Croatoan carving, far from being mysterious, was precisely what it appeared to be, a message indicating that at least some colonists had relocated to Croatoan Island. Others likely followed the original plan to move 50 miles inland, establishing themselves near friendly native communities along the Chowan River. Still others may have dispersed to additional locations. Over time, these small groups of English settlers would have intermarried with native populations and gradually lost their distinct cultural identity. By the time Jamestown was established in 1607, just 20 years later, the survivors of Roanoke would have been largely integrated into indigenous communities. This theory explains why the Jamestown colonists heard rumors of Europeans living among native tribes, but were never able to definitively locate them. It also accounts for John Lawson's 1701 observation of European features among the Hatteras people, and for the scattered archaeological evidence of European artifacts at multiple native sites. What makes the lost colony of Roanoke more than just a historical footnote is how it encapsulates the fragility and resilience of human ambition at the dawn of the colonial era. These 117 individuals, men, women, and children, embarked on one of history's great gambles, crossing an ocean to establish a new society in a barely understood land. Their disappearance serves as a poignant reminder of how thin the line between success and failure could be in such ventures. Had John White returned a year earlier, had the drought been less severe, had relations with all local tribes remained friendly, any of these factors might have led to a thriving colony rather than a historical mystery. The fate of Roanoke also offers a counter-narrative to the traditional European colonial story. Rather than conquering and displacing indigenous peoples, the evidence suggests that these English settlers ultimately survived by integrating with native communities, a remarkable reversal of the pattern that would come to dominate colonial encounters in subsequent centuries. Perhaps most importantly, Roanoke reminds us that history is rarely as straightforward as textbooks might suggest. The neat, linear narratives we construct often obscure the messy, complex reality of human experience. The colonists of Roanoke didn't simply disappear. They adapted, integrated, and survived in ways that challenged the very concept of what it meant to be an English colony in the New World. What makes the Roanoke disappearance so fascinating is the cosmic convergence of factors that transformed what might have been a successful colony into a centuries-old mystery. The massive geopolitical conflict between England and Spain delayed relief for 3 critical years. An unprecedented environmental catastrophe, the worst drought in 8 centuries, struck precisely when the colonists were most vulnerable. And the complex web of indigenous politics created a landscape where some native groups were allies and others enemies. No single factor doomed Roanoke. Instead, it was this perfect storm of unfortunate circumstances that forced the colonists to adapt in ways that made them essentially disappear from European historical records while potentially surviving through integration with indigenous communities. 4 centuries later, we're still piecing together this puzzle, not just to satisfy historical curiosity, but but because Roanoke represents something profound about the human experience. Our capacity to vanish and transform, to be both lost and found, to disappear from one story only to become part of another. The carving on that palisade post, Croatoan, wasn't the end of a story, but a breadcrumb marking the beginning of a new one. The colonists of Roanoke didn't simply vanish, they became something else entirely. And in doing so, they created America's first great mystery, one that continues to captivate us not because the answer is unknowable, but because the truth is likely more complex and fascinating than any simple explanation could possibly capture. As modern science and archaeology continue to unearth new evidence, the lines between mystery and history blur. The fate of Roanoke wasn't magical or supernatural. It was profoundly, tragically human. And perhaps that's why we remain so fascinated by those 117 souls who walked away from their settlement and into the mist of history, leaving behind nothing but a name carved in wood and questions that echo across the centuries. Thanks for watching.